It was the biggest Halloween party of the year, and Sarah, Emma, and Jake were pumped. Every October, Mr. Willis, an eccentric local, threw a legendary bash at his massive, decaying mansion at the edge of town. The rumors about him were wild. Some said he was a retired horror filmmaker, others that he had a history no one could quite piece together. But the truth didn't matter. His Halloween parties were the stuff of local legend. That year, though, something felt different. Sarah had noticed the invites were more selective. Only the town's older teens were invited, the ones who could handle a bit of fright without freaking out. When Sarah and her friends got their invites, it came with a note that said, "Asterisk, this year will be unforgettable." Asterisk, and that only added to their excitement. They arrived at the mansion just as the sun set. The towering structure loomed against the blood-red sky, its windows flickering with the glow of candles and strobe lights. Mr. Willis had outdone himself. The eerie ambience was perfect. Fog machines spilled mist over the lawn, skeletons hung from trees, and eerie, lifelike mannequins lined the front porch, their eyes appearing to follow you as you passed. Sarah and her friends pushed through the front door and were immediately swept up by the chaotic energy inside. Costumed partygoers filled every room, dancing, laughing, and downing drinks from cups shaped like skulls. The walls were covered in fake blood and cobwebs, and creepy Halloween tunes played in the background. It was a dream party. As the night wore on, they started noticing things, little details that didn't sit right. The mannequins in the hallway. They were eerily realistic, more like wax figures than plastic decorations. And some of the costumes looked disturbingly authentic, especially the masks. One guy had what looked like real stitches holding his face together, and another's skin looked unnaturally pale, like a corpse. At first, Sarah and her friends laughed it off. It's Halloween, after all, Sarah told herself. But as midnight neared, something about the atmosphere shifted. The laughter became less frequent, replaced by nervous glances and murmurs. The crowd seemed to thin, or maybe it just felt that way as a strange tension filled the mansion. "Let's check out the basement," Jake suggested, grinning mischievously. "I heard Willis has the scariest stuff down there." Emma hesitated, clearly unnerved. "Are you sure? I mean, what if it's off limits?" "Come on, Emma," Sarah said, her curiosity piqued. "It's Halloween. Let's live a little." The three of them snuck down the narrow staircase, using the dim light of their phones to guide them. The air grew colder, and the music from upstairs faded into a dull hum. The basement was darker than the rest of the house, the only light coming from a few candles placed haphazardly along the stone walls. It was like walking into an old crypt. When they reached the bottom, they found themselves in a wide, open space filled with what looked like a set from a horror movie. There were fake coffins, old surgical tools, and creepy dolls with cracked faces. In the center of the room was a large, circular table, and on it was an old-fashioned record player, softly spinning a vinyl record that played a chilling lullaby. "Now this is creepy," Jake said, his voice a little too loud in the quiet. Suddenly, there was a rustling sound from the far corner of the room, where a dark figure stood, half obscured by shadows. Sarah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure didn't move at first, and she convinced herself it was just another mannequin, one of Mr. Willis's freaky decorations. But then the figure took a step forward. Emma let out a gasp, and Jake instinctively stepped back. The figure was dressed in a torn, old-fashioned tuxedo, with a grotesque mask that looked like it was stitched together from different faces. Its eyes were hollow, black pits. The figure moved closer, slow and deliberate, like it was sizing them up. Sarah felt paralyzed, her mind racing as she tried to figure out if this was part of the party or something more sinister. Then, the figure reached into its jacket and pulled out a long, rusted knife, raising it toward them with a sickening smile. "Run!" Sarah screamed, breaking the silence. The three of them bolted for the stairs, their hearts pounding in their ears. They scrambled up the steps, barely making it to the first floor as the figure's heavy footsteps echoed behind them. But when they reached the main floor, the party was different. Everyone was gone. The music had stopped, the lights were dim, and the air was heavy with an oppressive silence. The decorations, once festive and fun, now looked grotesque, like real blood splattered across the walls, and the mannequins in the hallway. They were no longer mannequins. They were people. People frozen in place, their eyes wide open, their faces twisted in expressions of horror. Some were dressed as partygoers, others in elaborate costumes, but all of them were unmistakably real. "Oh my God," Emma whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "What the hell is going on?" "We need to get out of here," Jake said, his voice shaking. They ran toward the front door, but when they reached it, it wouldn't budge. They pounded on it, screamed for help, but it was as if the mansion itself had trapped them inside. The windows wouldn't open either. Suddenly, the voice of Mr. Willis echoed through the house, his calm, eerie tone sending chills down their spines. "Thank you all for attending my final Halloween party," he said, his voice crackling through hidden speakers. "I hope you've enjoyed the entertainment, but now, the real fun begins." Sarah looked at her friends, panic in her eyes. "What does he mean, real fun?" Before anyone could answer, the lights flickered out completely, plunging them into darkness. And in that moment, they heard the soft, unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching from behind them, the figure from the basement, no doubt coming to finish what it started. "Run," Jake whispered, but it was too late. The figure's cold breath brushed against the back of Sarah's neck, and as she turned, her scream was swallowed by the darkness. For as long as she could remember, Kendra had loved Halloween. Every year, she hosted an epic Halloween party for her friends at her parents' large house at the edge of town. But this year, for her senior year, she wanted to do something different, something that people would never forget. Kendra came up with the idea while flipping through an old book on haunted legends in the local library. She stumbled upon the story of a mansion, just outside of town, that had been abandoned for decades after a series of unsolved murders. According to local legend, anyone who tried to spend the night there never returned. Naturally, it became the perfect venue for her Halloween party. The night of the party arrived, and a group of Kendra's closest friends gathered at her house. They were all excited but nervous about the change of venue. The stories about the abandoned mansion were well known, but Kendra convinced them it was just a legend. Plus, the thought of being the first to party there was too thrilling to resist. After piling into cars and driving down winding country roads, they arrived at the mansion just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The house was more decrepit than Kendra had expected. Its windows were shattered, the roof sagged, and the front yard was overgrown with weeds and twisted branches. A sense of unease settled over the group. "This place is seriously creepy," said Megan, one of Kendra's friends, as they stood at the front gate. "Are you sure we should be here?" "Come on," Kendra said with a grin. "That's the whole point. It's Halloween, guys. It's supposed to be scary." Despite their reservations, they followed Kendra inside. The house smelled of mildew and dust, and the floorboards creaked under their feet. They set up in the grand foyer, stringing up a few decorations and setting out snacks. Kendra made sure to set the mood with eerie music and a few well-placed jump scares. As the night wore on, the party seemed to go off without a hitch. People were dancing, laughing, and marveling at the creepy surroundings. A few more friends arrived, and soon the mansion was filled with the sounds of excitement and fun. But just as Kendra was starting to think the party was a success, the atmosphere changed. It started with the lights. The generator they had brought to power the lights flickered and sputtered before going out entirely. The house was plunged into near darkness, save for the glow of a few flashlights and candles they had scattered around. Kendra shrugged it off. "It's fine. It's more atmospheric this way." But then strange things started happening. One of Kendra's friends, Daniel, swore he saw a figure in the upstairs window, looking down at the party. When they all rushed to see, no one was there. Another girl, Carly, said she heard whispering voices coming from the walls, but when they checked, they found nothing but peeling wallpaper and dust. Then, the doors began to slam shut, seemingly of their own accord. One by one, every exit they tried to use was suddenly locked. Panic began to set in. "Kendra, we need to get out of here," Megan said, her voice trembling. "Something's not right." Kendra was about to respond and the sound of footsteps echoed through the foyer. But these footsteps didn't belong to anyone at the party. They were heavy, deliberate, and they came from the floor above them. Everyone froze, their eyes glued to the staircase. Slowly, one by one, the steps descended. Kendra's heart pounded in her chest as she strained to see who, asterisk or what asterisk, was coming down. Suddenly, a shadowy figure appeared at the top of the stairs. It was tall and draped in tattered black robes, its face obscured by darkness. As it moved down the steps, an icy chill filled the room. "What the hell is that?" someone whispered, but no one had an answer. The figure reached the bottom of the staircase and paused, as if surveying the group. Without a word, it raised a hand, and every candle in the room blew out at once, plunging them into total darkness. Screams erupted as everyone scrambled to find a way out. Kendra fumbled with her phone, using its dim light to guide her toward the front door, but it was still locked. The figure moved silently through the chaos, its presence overwhelming, suffocating. Desperate, Kendra tried to force open a window, but it wouldn't budge. As she looked around, she realized that several of her friends had already vanished, disappeared into the darkness as if they were never there. "Kendra!" Megan's voice called out from somewhere nearby, but when Kendra turned, all she saw was a fleeting shadow. Suddenly, the figure was in front of her. Its hollow eyes seemed to pierce her soul as it reached out a bony hand toward her. A wave of cold washed over her, and her body locked up in fear. Just as she thought it would grab her, a loud crash echoed through the room, followed by a blinding light. When Kendra opened her eyes, the figure was gone. The front door was wide open, and the few remaining partygoers were already sprinting outside. She didn't waste a second. They fled the mansion, running until they reached their cars. No one spoke as they peeled out of the driveway and sped back to town, the memory of what had happened burned into their minds. Kendra never hosted another Halloween party. And the mansion? It remained as it always had, empty, decaying, and full of secrets no one dared to uncover again. Max wasn't much of a Halloween guy, but when his girlfriend, Brooke, insisted they attend a Halloween party at Elmwood Hall, he reluctantly agreed. Elmwood Hall was the creepy, abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town that had been a local legend for decades. Once the home of the wealthy Hawthorne family, it had been abandoned after a series of mysterious deaths in the 1940s. Some said the mansion was haunted, but Max didn't believe in that kind of stuff. The party was being thrown by some older kids from town who had heard the stories and wanted to do something daring for Halloween. The whole thing felt a little childish to Max, but he didn't want to ruin Brooke's excitement. They arrived at the mansion just as the sun was setting. The house loomed over them, its windows dark and its stone facade covered in ivy. A few other cars were already parked outside, and the sound of laughter and music echoed from within. "This place is creepy as hell," Max muttered as they approached the front door. "That's the whole point, babe," Brooke said with a grin. "Come on, it'll be fun." They stepped inside to find the party in full swing. People were scattered throughout the mansion, some dancing, some drinking, and others exploring the many rooms and corridors. The whole place had been decorated for Halloween, fake cobwebs hung from the ceilings, plastic skeletons adorned the walls, and dim orange lights gave the place an eerie glow. Max tried to relax and have a good time, but there was something about the mansion that put him on edge. The air was thick and musty, and every room seemed darker than it should be. After a couple of hours, Brooke decided she wanted to explore the upper floors. Max reluctantly agreed, and they made their way up the grand staircase to the second floor. The atmosphere up there was even creepier than downstairs. The air was colder, and the floorboards creaked beneath their feet. They wandered down a long hallway lined with old portraits of the Hawthorne family. Their eyes seemed to follow Max as he passed, and he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching him. "I don't like this," Max said, his voice low. "Let's go back downstairs." "Come on, don't be such a wimp," Brooke teased. She stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall and tried the handle. Locked. "Good, let's leave it that way," Max said, already turning to go. But as they started back down the hall, a loud bang echoed behind them. They whipped around to see the door Brooke had tried was now ajar, slowly creaking open on its own. Max's heart pounded in his chest. "No way. We're out of here." But Brooke was already walking toward the door. "We have to check it out. It's probably just a draft or something." Max hesitated, then followed her into the room. It was a bedroom, clearly untouched for decades. Dust coated every surface, and a thick layer of cobwebs hung from the ceiling. The only light came from the flickering candles in the hallway. As they stepped further inside, the door slammed shut behind them. Brooke let out a startled gasp, and Max rushed to the door, tugging on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Max, look," Brooke whispered, her voice trembling. He turned to see her standing by the window, staring at something on the floor. He crossed the room to join her and felt a chill run down his spine. Lying on the dusty floor was a single photograph. It was old, black and white, and worn with age. In the photo, a young couple stood in the very room they were in. But what caught Max's eye was the figure standing behind them, barely visible in the shadows. It was a tall, thin man with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. His hand rested on the woman's shoulder as if claiming her. Max felt a wave of nausea. "We need to go. Now." Before they could move, the room plunged into darkness. The temperature dropped, and a low, guttural whisper filled the air. "Get out." Max's blood ran cold. He grabbed Brooke's hand and yanked on the door with all his strength. It finally gave way, and they bolted down the hallway, their footsteps echoing off the walls. They didn't stop running until they were outside, the mansion looming behind them like a dark, silent predator. The party was still going on downstairs, completely oblivious to what had just happened. Max and Brooke didn't speak a word as they got into their car and sped away from Elmwood Hall. They never talked about that night again. And they certainly never went back to the mansion. Love these stories? YouTube algorithm suggests that you would like to listen to these stories. Click on the video on the screen.